My mother forgot to end the call, and I heard her say, "She has never done anything for this family. She's a burden, Thomas. A complete failure. Sometimes I wish I'd never had her." The letter came 4 days after I signed the listing agreement, and it wasn't from Danielle Brooks. It was from a collections agency in Ohio, addressed to Elena Whitfield, referencing an account I had never opened, at a lender I had never heard of, Great Lakes Personal Credit, with a balance of $4,180 and a due date that had already passed twice. I stood in my own kitchen holding a bill for a loan I didn't take out, and for a second I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain didn't have anywhere else to put the feeling. I want to say I knew immediately. I didn't. I told myself it was a mix-up. Companies got names wrong all the time. I'd had a card skimmed once at a gas station in college, and this felt like an echo of that. Random, impersonal, nothing to do with the people asleep 2 floors below me in the house I was legally, finally, in the process of taking back. I called the number on the letter the next morning during my 10 o'clock break, sitting in my car in the parking garage at work because I didn't trust myself to have this conversation anywhere my mother might walk past. The woman on the phone confirmed the account had been opened 16 months earlier, verified with a social security number ending in the same 4 digits as mine, and shipped to a billing address that was, word for word, my address, my house, the one my parents were living in. "Was there a phone number on file?" I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She read it back to me. It was my father's cell. I sat in that garage for 11 minutes without moving. I know it was 11 minutes because I looked at the dashboard clock when I hung up, and again when a car alarm 3 spaces down finally shocked me back into my body. I didn't call my parents. I called Danielle. "I need to add something to what we're working on," I said, and I told her everything: the letter, the account, the phone number. There was a pause on her end, the kind of pause I was starting to recognize as, "This is worse than you think, but I'm choosing my words." "Elena, I want you to do 2 things before you do anything else," she said. "Don't confront them yet, and pull your full credit report today. All 3 bureaus, not the free one. I want to know if this is one account or a pattern. You think there's more. I think people who hide savings for 3 years while telling their daughter they're broke don't usually stop at one lie," she said. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. She wasn't. By that night, I had the reports open on my laptop at my kitchen table, the same table where I used to eat breakfast across from my mother every morning, and tell myself the tightness in my chest was just stress from work. 3 accounts I didn't recognize: a retail card from a home improvement chain with a $2,900 balance, a small personal loan, the Ohio one, and a third, a store credit line at a furniture outlet 2 towns over. Opened 9 months ago. Balance paid down to 0. That last one stopped me cold because I remembered the couch. My parents' den downstairs had gotten a new sectional in the spring. Mom told me Dad's old army buddy gave it to them for free when he downsized. I remembered thinking it was generous. I remembered thanking a man I'd never met, in my head, for a favor that had actually come out of a credit line opened in my name. My hands were shaking by the time I closed the laptop, not the trembling kind. The kind where you have to consciously tell your fingers to stop, and they don't listen right away. I didn't sleep. Around 1 in the morning, I got up and stood outside my parents' bedroom door, the door to what used to be my home office, back when this was just my house and not a courtroom I hadn't scheduled yet. And I listened to my father snore like a man with nothing on his conscience. I went back upstairs. I didn't open the door. I wasn't ready. I told myself I needed proof first. Needed it laid out clean and undeniable, because I already knew what would happen if I walked in there with nothing but a feeling. My mother would cry before I finished my first sentence. My father would say I was overreacting. And somehow, by the time the dust settled, I'd be the daughter who ambushed her parents at 1 in the morning over a misunderstanding. I'd learned that lesson already, eavesdropping in a hallway with a cake in my hands. I wasn't going to relearn it. The next morning, I called Danielle again before I'd even had coffee. "I want a forensic accountant," I said. "Someone who can trace this properly. Not for revenge, for evidence." "I know someone," Danielle said. "Sandra Kim. She's a certified fraud examiner. Does a lot of financial exploitation cases. Family cases mostly, which is its own kind of ugly. She's thorough. She's also going to cost you. I don't care what it costs." "I know," Danielle said, and I could hear something almost gentle under the professionalism. That's usually how I know it's real. Sandra Kim's office was on the 4th floor of a converted mill building downtown. Exposed brick and a framed certificate from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners hanging behind her desk like a diploma from a school nobody wants to graduate from. She had 12 years in forensic accounting, she told me. The last 6 specifically in elder and family financial exploitation. She said the words, family financial exploitation, the way a doctor says a diagnosis, clinically, so it doesn't knock you over, even though it's the thing that's about to knock you over. "I want to be honest with you before we start," Sandra said, sliding an intake form across the desk. Cases like this take time, and they're rarely as small as the first thing you find. If you want, I can just close the loan account and walk away. Dispute it, document it, done in a few weeks. Or I can pull the full picture. Every account tied to your identity, every transfer in and out of your parents' accounts for the last 3 years, and build you something that would hold up with a detective or a DA if it comes to that. That's a different scope. That's a different bill. I thought about the sectional couch, about the tax bill I paid because Dad said their savings were gone, about my mother's voice through a tablet speaker saying she thinks a salary makes her important. The full picture, I said. It took Sandra 11 days. I went back to work in the meantime, because bills don't stop coming just because your life is on fire, and because Riley kept physically showing up at my desk with coffee I hadn't asked for, sitting across from me like a bodyguard for my nervous system. My team had a project deadline that week, the same team that had just closed the biggest contract in company history, the reason I'd bought that lemon cake in the first place, and I ran 2 client calls with my phone buzzing in my bag, Sandra's assistant emailing me spreadsheet after spreadsheet I didn't open until I got home, because I didn't trust myself to keep a straight face on a video call while reading them. At home, my parents acted normal. That was the part that undid me a little more each day. My mother hummed while she loaded the dishwasher. My father asked me, completely straight-faced, how the big contract thing was going, like he hadn't spent 3 years living in a house paid for by a daughter he called a failure to her aunt. I started sleeping with my laptop locked in my car. On the 11th day, Sandra called me in. She had it laid out on the conference table like a crime scene, because in every way that mattered, it was 3 fraudulent accounts totaling $8,340 in debt still outstanding, plus the paid-off furniture line, which brought the total credit opened in my name to just over $11,000. But that wasn't the part that made me grip the edge of the table. This is the part I need you to see clearly, Sandra said, turning her laptop toward me. Your parents' joint checking account. Over the past 26 months, there are 14 transfers to an account ending in 4471, ranging from $300 to $1,100 each. Total just over $9,000. Whose account is that? Sandra looked at me the way you look at someone right before you hand them something heavy. It's registered to Marcus Whitfield, she said. My brother, the one they were saving up to move near, the one who called twice a year and got treated every single time he did show up, like a returning war hero. My parents didn't have a secret nest egg for their own future. They'd been quietly funding my brother's life with money they claimed not to have, some of it their own savings, and, based on the timeline Sandra pulled, some of it laundered straight through credit lines opened in my name and paid down before I'd ever noticed the statements. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect the crying to come at the big reveal. And mine didn't. What came instead was a very quiet, very cold clarity, like a window opening in a stuffy room. I finally understood the arithmetic of my whole life in that house. I wasn't a daughter they were struggling to support. I was infrastructure. I was the thing that made the rest of the plan possible. What happens now? I asked. Now, Sandra said. You decide what kind of case you want this to be. I called Danielle from the parking lot before I even started my car. I have a full picture, I said. It's bigger than a loan mix-up. Okay, she said. Then we need to talk about whether this stays civil or goes criminal. Because Elena, identity theft against a family member is still identity theft. If you want, this can go to the police tonight. I sat there a long time with the phone against my ear, listening to her breathe on the other end. Patient. The way people are patient with you right before you make a decision you can't take back. Not tonight, I said finally. I want to give them one chance to make it right without a badge in the room. If they take it, fine. If they don't, then we escalate, Danielle finished. I want to say the conversation with my parents that followed was dramatic, the kind of thing that would look good slowed down with music behind it. It wasn't. It was worse, in the way quiet things are worse than loud ones. I sat them down at the kitchen table on a Thursday night, printouts in a folder in front of me, and I told them what Sandra found. I kept my voice level. I did not raise it once, and I think that unsettled them more than yelling would have, because yelling was a language they knew how to manage. Calm evidence was not. My mother's face did the thing I'd been bracing for. The crumple, the hand over the mouth, the Elena, it's not what it looks like. My father, to his credit, or maybe to his shame, didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the folder like it might close itself if he waited long enough. We were going to pay it back, Mom said. Every cent. We just needed a little more time, and you were doing so well. You didn't even notice. I noticed everything. We were going to pay it back, Mom said. Every cent. We just needed a little more time, and you were doing so well. You didn't even notice. I noticed everything, I said. I noticed the tax bill I covered because you said you were broke. I noticed the couch. I paid your mortgage for 3 years while you funneled money to Marcus behind my back and told my aunt I was a burden on this family. That landed. I watched it land. My mother's mouth opened and shut once like she'd forgotten, for a moment, that I'd been in that hallway. My father finally spoke. "It was my idea," he said. "The transfers. Your mother didn't want to at first." I don't know if that was true. I don't know if he said it to protect her or because it actually was his idea and he was, in whatever twisted version of decency he still had, trying to keep her out of the worst of it. Either way, it didn't change the number on the folder. "I want it repaid," I said. "All of it. The fraudulent accounts closed and satisfied, and the $9,000 from the joint account reimbursed to me directly. In writing, notarized. And I want you both out of this house within 30 days. 30 days, Mom repeated, like I'd told her 30 minutes. "Where exactly do you expect us to go, Elena? We're your parents." "You have 3 years of savings," I said. "You told Aunt Rosa yourself. 1 more year, and you'd have enough to move near Marcus. Consider this the year moved up." That was the moment my mother stopped crying and started calculating. I could see it happen behind her eyes, the shift from performance to strategy, and it scared me more than the tears had, because I knew that look. I'd grown up watching that look decide the outcome of every family conflict I'd ever lost. She didn't sign anything that night. Neither of them did. They asked for time to think it over, and I gave it to them because Danielle had told me that pushing too hard too fast without paperwork in hand could blow up in my face if this ever became a court matter. Patience, she said, was a weapon too. I just didn't feel like I was holding one. I felt like I was standing very still in a house that no longer felt like mine, waiting to see which direction the next blow would come from. It came 4 days later, and it came from a place I hadn't braced for at all. I was at my desk at 9:40 on a Tuesday morning when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me pick up. "Is this Elena Whitfield?" a man's voice asked. "This is Officer Diaz with the County Sheriff's Department. We received a welfare check request for this address regarding your parents, Celia and Thomas Whitfield. Can you confirm you're the homeowner?" For a second, the words didn't assemble into anything coherent. A welfare check on my parents, who I had seen eating breakfast in my kitchen 4 hours earlier. Yes, I'm the homeowner. What's this about?" The caller reported concerns about elderly residents being forced out of their home without notice, possibly experiencing distress, he said. "Standard procedure? We just do a check. Are your parents there now?" They weren't elderly. My mother was 61 and ran 3 miles most mornings. My father still worked part-time doing inventory at a hardware store, and they hadn't been forced out of anything. They hadn't even signed a single piece of paper yet. I knew, with the specific clarity of someone who has just watched a familiar hand deal a familiar card, exactly who had made that call. I didn't yell at Officer Diaz. I thanked him for checking, told him my parents were fine and at home, and asked very calmly whether the caller had left a name. He wasn't supposed to share that. He shared it anyway, off the record, because I think something in my voice told him I already knew. Caller identified as a family member, a son, I believe, Marcus. I called Danielle from the bathroom at work, the door locked, my back against the tile. "They're trying to get ahead of it," she said, once I'd told her. "A welfare check on paper looks like concern. If this escalates, if they file for a restraining order, or make an elder abuse complaint to Adult Protective Services, it complicates everything. Even if it's baseless, it takes time to clear, and time is the one thing we don't have a lot of before your closing. There's a closing date? Your realtor called this morning. She has a buyer ready to move fast. Investor, cash offer, wants to close in 9 days. It's a good offer, Elena, but it means everything with your parents needs to be resolved before then, formally in writing. Or you'll be selling a house with 2 occupants who have no legal right to be there, and every incentive to make that as messy as possible. 9 days. I hung up and sat on the closed toilet lid in a single-stall bathroom at my office for 4 minutes, breathing in a pattern Riley had taught me during a bad flight once. 4 counts in, hold 4, out for 6, until my hands stopped feeling like they belonged to someone else. That night, I didn't go home right away. I drove to my Aunt Rosa's instead, the aunt from the phone call, the one who'd said, "That is a cruel thing to say," into a tablet my mother forgot was still recording her. I hadn't spoken to Rosa since that day. I hadn't known how to start the conversation. She opened the door before I knocked, the way people do when they've been watching for headlights. "I wondered when you'd come," she said. I told her everything. The loan, the couch, Marcus's account, the welfare check. She listened with her arms crossed and her jaw tight, and when I finished, she went to a drawer in her kitchen and pulled out a folder of her own. Bank transfer confirmations she'd screenshotted over the past year, times my mother had asked to borrow money from her too. Small amounts, always paid back just late enough to seem honest and just often enough to be a pattern. "I didn't want to believe it either," Rosa said, "but I kept the records. Old habit. My ex-husband taught me that, unfortunately. Keep the paper." She handed the folder to me. "You should give this to your accountant," she said. "And Elena, when this goes where I think it's going, I'll say what I heard on that call. Under oath if I have to." I should have said something 3 years ago. I left her house that night with a folder that made Sandra's spreadsheet even heavier. And for the first time since the hallway, I didn't feel completely alone in it. The next 6 days moved like a countdown clock I could hear even when I wasn't looking at it. Sandra incorporated Rosa's records and finalized a report. 19 pages, time-stamped, Cross-referenced, the kind of document Danielle said looked less like a family dispute and more like a case file, because that's exactly what it had become. Danielle drafted a formal demand, repayment agreement, notarized, 30-day vacate notice already served, all of it stacked and ready. My mother called me 11 times over those 6 days. I let most of them go to voicemail because Danielle told me every conversation from here needed to happen through her office, on the record, or risk being twisted into something else later. The one call I did answer, my mother's voice had gone somewhere I'd never heard it go before. Not angry, not performing sadness. Flat. "You're really doing this," she said, "to your own mother." "You did this," I said. "I'm just the first person in this family who kept receipts." She hung up on me. It was the first time in 33 years my mother had hung up on me instead of the other way around, and I sat with that small, strange victory longer than I probably should have. 2 days before closing, everything came to a head at once, the way Danielle had warned me it might. I got a call at 4:50 p.m. from a woman who introduced herself as an investigator with Adult Protective Services, following up on a complaint that elderly parents were being financially exploited and displaced by their adult child. My stomach dropped so fast I had to sit down at my desk. "I understand this is upsetting," she said, not unkindly, "but I do have to ask you some questions as part of the intake." I answered everyone. I gave her Danielle's name and number. I gave her Sandra's report number. I told her, as steadily as I could manage, that the financial exploitation in this case ran in the opposite direction from what had been reported, and that I had 19 pages of documentation to prove it. There was a pause on her end, and then something in her tone shifted, the particular shift of someone who has done this job long enough to recognize when a complaint doesn't match the caller's story. "Ms. Whitfield, can you have your attorney send that documentation to me directly, today, if possible?" Danielle sent it within the hour. The investigator called back at 7:15 that evening. "Based on what I'm seeing," she said, "this doesn't meet the criteria we'd typically pursue as elder exploitation. I'd encourage you to keep records of any further contact from the reporting party, in case this becomes a pattern." I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor, not the table, the floor, back against the cabinets, and finally let myself cry, not from grief exactly, but from the sheer physical release of adrenaline that had nowhere left to go. The last blow came the next morning, 26 hours before closing. My father called me from a number I didn't recognize, his work phone. I found out later, because he didn't want it showing up on my caller ID and being ignored. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. "Your mother wants to fight this in court," he said, no preamble. "She's already talked to some lawyer she found online. She wants to claim she has tenant rights, squatters' rights, something like that. She thinks if she drags it out long enough, you'll cave, like you always do." "I'm not caving, Dad." "I know," he said, and something in his voice cracked. Just slightly, just enough. "I'm calling because I don't want to lose you completely over this. I'll sign. Whatever Danielle sends over, I'll sign it tonight. I can't undo what we did to you, Elena. I can undo dragging it out." He signed that night. The repayment agreement, the vacate acknowledgement, a statement corroborating the account transfers to Marcus. My mother held out for 4 more hours, alone in a house she no longer had any legal claim to, before Danielle informed her, calmly and in writing, that a signed statement from my father, combined with Sandra's forensic report and Rose's transfer records, was more than sufficient to refer the fraudulent accounts to the county's financial crimes unit, whether she cooperated or not. Detective Renee Ford called me the following week. 14 years with the department. The last 9 in financial crimes, Danielle told me before I picked up, so I'd know exactly who I was talking to. She confirmed that with the documentation provided, they had grounds to pursue identity theft charges against my mother specifically, since the credit applications traced back to her IP address and her handwriting on 2 paper applications the furniture store still had on file. "Whether it proceeds to charges is up to the DA's office," Detective Ford said, "but I want you to know, this wasn't ambiguous. What happened to you has a name, and it's a crime, regardless of who did it to you." Hearing a stranger with a badge say that out loud did something to me that 3 weeks of spreadsheets hadn't. It made it real in a way I could finally stop arguing with myself about. My mother ultimately avoided formal charges, not because the evidence wasn't there, but because I told the DA's office, through Danielle, that I wanted restitution and distance more than I wanted my mother in a courtroom with my name in the case file for the rest of both our lives. She signed the same agreement my father had, under considerably more pressure and considerably less grace, 4 days before the house closed. They moved out on a Saturday. I wasn't there. I'd told Danielle I didn't need to watch it, and Riley had, without asking, already booked us both a hotel room 2 towns over for the weekend. "So you have somewhere to be that isn't the scene of the crime," she said, and I let her manage that part of my life because I no longer had the bandwidth to manage it myself. Marcus called me exactly once after everything settled, furious that his welfare check story had backfired, furious that his name had turned up in a forensic accountant's report, furious that his own fiancé had found out where some of their wedding fund had actually come from. He didn't apologize. He told me I'd torn the family apart over money, and I told him the family had torn itself apart over money years before I found the receipts, and I was just the first one willing to read them out loud. I sold the house 9 days after I'd planned to, the closing pushed slightly by the paperwork chaos. But it closed. I walked away with the equity, minus what I put toward paying off the last of the fraudulent accounts myself, faster than the credit bureau's dispute process would have managed it, because Sandra told me a clean credit report was worth more to my future than waiting for institutions to move at institutional speed. I moved into a 2-bedroom condo 11 minutes from my office, small enough that no one could move into the other bedroom without me noticing, and I started seeing a therapist, Naomi Chen, who specializes, among other things, in adult children navigating financial exploitation by parents, a specialty I hadn't known existed until I needed it. You're allowed to grieve them, she told me in our 3rd session, even the version of them that never existed, even while you protect yourself from the version that did. I think about that a lot, usually late at night in the quiet of an apartment that is finally, completely, unarguably mine. My father texts sometimes. Small things. A photo of a sunset. A thinking of you. I answer sometimes when I have the room for it. My mother hasn't reached out once, not directly. Only through the occasional relative who mentions carefully that she's still adjusting. As though adjusting to consequences is a diagnosis instead of a choice she's welcome to make differently. Aunt Rosa and I talk every week now. Real conversations, not the polite kind we used to have at holidays. She told me once that she almost didn't say anything on that video call 3 years ago, that she'd talked herself out of it a dozen times before that one moment when she couldn't stay quiet anymore. I'm glad the call didn't end when your mother thought it did, she told me. So am I. I still have that lemon cake box somehow, flattened and stuffed in the back of a kitchen drawer in my new place. I don't know why I kept it, except that it feels like proof of something. Proof of the exact moment I stopped waiting for my family to hand me the truth and started going and finding it myself. My mother once told a phone that didn't hang itself up that I'd never done anything for this family. I proved her right in the end. I stopped doing anything for that version of the family the moment I found out what it had been doing to me.